everybody. Welcome to Pod Casty For Me, podcast about film, culture, politics, and Clint Eastwood, where we watch every film directed by and or starring American filmmaker Clint Eastwood and explore how they speak to their moment. In this one, at least one of us has COVID.
It's true.
Podcast hosted by two guys. I'm one of the guys. I don't think I have COVID. My name is Jake Sir.
I'm one of the guys. I do think I have COVID, and that's the kind of dynamic we brought to this episode. A little bit of contrasting perspectives.
They always say that in any podcasting duo, you need contrast. You need somebody who has COVID and somebody who is pretty sure he doesn't.
We found a little bit of it on episode, 49, 50?
Found a little bit of COVID on episode 50. Welcome to the 50th episode. We were supposed to record this in person.
That's right.
We were going to do it live from Carmel. We were going to do it in my parked car in Carmel by the Sea, California. The morning before we were to drive to Carmel together, Ian says, "I've got a little tickle in my throat." And I say, "Shut up, pussy. That's not how I raised you to be." And he took a COVID test just in case. Turned out, positive COVID test. The man has COVID.
That's right. Reminder to do a just in case COVID test. Do it just in case, folks. Especially if you have free access.
Shout out to Pat's guest, friend of the show for us, Tiffany, for providing that beautiful COVID test.
That's right.
Then, despite having spent several days in almost constant contact with Ian, I have now taken 4 tests, all of which have come out negative.
I was trying to calculate probably about 16 hours of car time.
Yeah.
You and I in the car.
Car talk.
And,
click and clack.
That's right. Those boys, NPR boys. I mean, presumably not all of that would have been post-exposure or post-production of viral load.
I rejected Ian's load for the first time in the 12 years of our friendship.
Now, on that note, I would like to take a moment. Our show has been described as in the greater constellation of the dirtbag left, which I don't know if I totally agree, but I get it, I guess.
Who described it that way? Who has been describing the show? If you've been describing the show, cut it out.
Back off. All right. But I want to actually take a couple quick seconds here to do a real disclaimer. This episode will be full of ridicule, which we, I think in our hearts, believe to be directed at the right people who must be ridiculed in order to build a collective consciousness and get them out of power. But of course, we are also recording this at the time of the ongoing genocidal massacre, daily iterated massacre in Palestine. And given the United States' involvement with Israel, the provision of weapons, the funding of their whole awful project, I figured it was worth calling out the fact that we recognize discussing American Sniper, a film that also maybe trivializes, depending on your perspective, or at least wants to talk about the potential nobility of killing people in defense of your country and killing particularly brown people in the Middle East in defense of your country. I thought maybe it was worth taking a moment to show a little bit of awareness of the conditions under which we're recording this.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing that. Wholeheartedly agree. This is a movie which serves to try to complicate and humanize the very difficult decision that one is forced to take in order to use a high-powered rifle from a position of complete safety to murder a 9-year-old from the Middle East, which is something that I have literally seen videos of IDF soldiers doing. For some reason, these keep being shown to me, and it's something that we all should be recognizing and contending with. And this is a very real thing. We will address, we will aim our prodigious clowning skills at the people who would trivialize or simplify or narrativize the people who do this and think it's cool to do this. We hope that we are taking people down a peg and not just laughing at the whole situation. But if you find fault with our episode, we encourage you to come and find us and tell us to our face and beat us also as well.
Yeah. What is it that Kurt Vonnegut said? Bunch of funny, silly guys with a whipped cream pie stopped the Vietnam War. Is that right? You familiar with this quote?
I believe it was Noam Chomsky who said that.
Right.
I was thinking about that, though. I was thinking about, because, this is an Iraq War film released pretty deep into the Iraq War. Was it technically over at this point? When did major combat operations end?
Well, I think right around this time, but I think there were continuing combat operations as late as like 2011, 2012. So
okay. So this is an Iraq War film, basically the successful Iraq War film monetarily.
Massively successful, 540
massively
million
successful, $547 million.
Oof.
How much money did the United States pledge to give Gazans?
I don't remember. It was like $13 each or something.
It was like $100 million, maybe.
Yep.
And then, meanwhile, like $2 billion in new sniper rifles.
Correct.
For the IDF.
Exactly. Yes.
White phosphorus manufactured in the United States.
Yep.
We'll get to it. Folks. We're talking American Sniper today. And it's a big boy. We're talking around it. We're scared to get involved. Let's jump in. Let's enlist. Let's sign up.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's sign up. Let's go to our local mini mall.
Yes, and with that, we'll jump into our signature segment, the 2 questions. Ian, I have a 2 question for you.
Lay it on me, buddy.
Do you think COVID-19 is real? No, I'm just kidding. Hey, come on.
Yeah, right.
My 2 question for you is, do you know where your draft card is?
Absolutely not. I do not know where my draft card is. I'm aware that
I have no idea as well.
I received something in the mail at the ripe age of 18. Just full-bodied, not hard.
Your body was so ripe and full when you were 18.
Yeah, God.
I miss that.
Yeah, me too.
You think we're kind of dirtbag left?
No, I don't. Do you know where yours is?
No, of course not.
Okay.
Dude, I don't know where my social security card is.
Yep. Yeah.
I got to get a new one of those.
Selective service. That sounds like my ISP down there in Oaxaca. You know what I'm talking about?
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's beautiful. And you know what? I feel really heartened that you made a joke because it suggests to me that your brain is still functioning at some level.
Cool. I'll keep making jokes about 3 minutes after we touch on the subject just to see if that...
That's how it usually goes when you're on your Oaxacan Wi-Fi. It's when I get them.
It's true. Yep. So this feels pretty comfortable to you, I bet.
You are in crystal clear HD today, as opposed to usually I'm getting fewer P from your resolution.
Sure.
But today it looks like when Paramount cranks up the color on the Paramount Blu-ray to say high definition, and then show me like a clip of what's a Paramount movie they would show me a clip of. Like, I mean, I couldn't tell you with a fucking gun to my head. I wish there was one.
He may still have COVID, folks. We're going to keep testing. We don't know what's going on. What about a Top Gun?
We'll keep testing. Something's wrong with me for sure, but it may be the same thing that was wrong. It may be the same thing that was wrong with me before.
Wrong old Reagan. You know what I mean?
I mean, I guess I do.
Okay, cool.
All right, that was a quick 2 question. What do you got for me?
Yeah, my question was, you ever want a truck? You ever think about wanting a truck? You ever feel attracted to a truck?
I got some truck material.
Yeah? Do you really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, first of all, there's that famous country song that is sort of often the subject of ridicule from liberal types that goes, there's something about a truck, because the song is trying to suggest that there is some ineffable je ne sais quoi around a pickup truck that appeals to the singer. There's just something about a truck, but it sounds like the lowest effort country lyric, just saying something about a truck.
Sure.
Hey, truck.
Yeah, just boiling it down to only the archetypes. Now, the liberal types would, of course, prefer to hear a song about something about the nice new New Yorker article.
Something about the nice new New Yorker article. I actually read a nice old New Yorker article, or some of one, in preparation for this.
This is one of the guys that I'm talking about.
Yeah, you're right. Free tote bag, the song. That's what they would love.
Yeah, that's right.
People aren't naming stuff the song nearly as much as they should.
No, you're right.
By the way, we'll be talking about it, but on thenumbers.com right now, it says, weekend projections, Wonka singing up impressive 39 million on debut. Pardon me.
Yeah.
It's singing up?
This is
money?
The breakdown. This is like the variety-initiated breakdown of language. The Deadline Hollywood breakdown of language.
Why not just like, he's a confectioner, Wonka's tantalizing $39 million debut. Wonka
sweetens,
bites into.
Okay, all right, yep.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean?
I think I do. Yep.
Hello? So that's some truck material. I also, my father moved to a more rural area than he had lived in prior, and he got a Nissan Frontier pickup truck. Nissan Frontier, one of the smallest pickup trucks you can get while still being a pickup truck that isn't like, something that a sanitation worker in Tokyo drives around.
I love those guys and their little trucks.
Shout out to those guys. Love those guys. Probably, I can't imagine what the uniform is, but I know I'll like it.
Oh, yeah. It looks like it might be a converted motorcycle engine in there. You're not entirely sure. Or
exactly,
our friend
exactly.
Nanny Moretti, when he goes to that little island, they drive a really wonderful tiny truck to get him up the hill there.
Danny Moretti. Anyway, I think trucks are probably used. They should only be used by people who need the truck. Should not be your regular ass car.
The reason that I asked the question, of course, is because, yes, I certainly want to acknowledge the genuine use of trucks. I work on farms. They're uniquely effective in some situations, but I think we're all aware that the predominance of the Ford F-150 as an object of desire is more related to the type of ideology we see on screen here in this film than any kind of use value.
I was just seeing an article today, another one of those many articles talking about how the tallening and biggening of the average American automobile is extraordinarily dangerous. If you're hit by an SUV, which, the truck and the SUV are kissing cousins for sure. Yep. You're hit by one of these bigger cars, you're something like 8 times more likely to be killed. Yep. Yeah, than if I, in my Honda Fit, were to hit somebody, and I never have.
Specifically, the number of children, I think, killed by SUVs and trucks because of their limited visibility.
Well, you can't see them.
Exactly.
Yeah. So trucks are so fucked unless you need one, but I don't think anyone needs like a duded up Ford F-350 with, Sirius XM in there. It's if you need to bring a bunch of hay from over here to over there, then get yourself the hay mover.
Oh, yeah.
But
doesn't have to be lifted, shifted.
If you're going to Feeling So Gifted, Sugar How You Get So Fly, or whatever. You ever drive a truck down there?
Oh, yeah. Can't remember at this brain-addled moment if I discussed it on pod or not, but the main farm that I work at, they got a truck there. It is a manual. Basically, every time I get the dreaded text saying, I am at the highway, can you come pick me up? I just might break out immediately into a sweat, knowing that I'm going to have to back that baby, turn it around in like an 8-point turn on the side of a steepish hillside, and then make my way down there. And to be clear, going downhill about as easy as it gets to drive a manual. So
Sure.
This is just a me problem exclusively.
What's the name of the pickup truck that is it the Hilux, the Toyota Hilux?
What are you talking about?
It's used as a technical, like a non-standard military vehicle by militant groups around the world. That's the Toyota Hilux, right?
This is like a guerrilla classic.
It's like
this is the AK-47 of trucks.
It is.
Hell yeah, dude.
Exactly. Yeah. So we do want to. There's going to be a couple of carve-outs in our declarations today.
Yeah.
First carve-out in the fatwa against trucks is the Toyota Hilux. Shout out to the Toyota Hilux when it is being used in the service of broader liberation of all people.
Absolutely.
The tearing down of structures of dominance.
This violence, which people will attribute to those guerrillas themselves, is fully a product of the imperial forces putting them in that position. And we know that this is...
I know you are saying like guerrilla, but imagine the Toyota Hilux chock-a-block with mountain gorillas.
I will imagine that. Man,
one of them has Oakleys on.
Clyde Force. Oh yeah, he better have some Oakleys on. That's the staff sergeant.
Yeah, exactly. All right,
let's get into it. Let's get into the real thing.
We're good. We're done with the 2 questions. Time to talk about American Sniper. This is 2014 American biographical war drama film directed by Clint Eastwood and written by Jason Hall. That's right, Devin McLeish from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh, yeah.
I did not remember this character at all. I watched all of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Same.
In like high school. Early high school, maybe middle school.
Oh, wow. Well, not an early adopter because that was probably well after it came out. I think it finished in about 2005.
Yeah.
But I watched it freshman year of college and just thought, oh, this is the good shit.
This is the best anyone's ever done it. To have little witches and stuff saying, he's right behind me, isn't he?
Yeah. That's something our pal Xander would say. Of course, Charisma Carpenter also probably experiencing a lot of verbal abuse between basically every good scene in that show, from what I understand now.
Probably.
Joss Whedon, bad man. But this, I think I'm going to give it a ton of credit for building my fondness for fun spooky. Just that single piece of cultural material.
You guys never heard of The Haunted Mansion at Disneyland? Anyway.
So, he writes this film based on Chris Kyle's autobiography, which is called what again?
American Sniper.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. I got some production context for you. Cool. Let's cook it.
Get it cooking.
I got a bunch of stuff. It's a type of sea monster. It originates with a producer named Peter Morgan, who is not the Peter Morgan who wrote Hereafter, which is very weird.
This was like getting hit with a baseball bat. I saw this name on screen. I just thought I was just dialed in. I was just seeing the Clint Matrix everywhere, and you're here telling me.
Surprise.
Yeah.
It's a different guy. Yeah. And so he sends Jason Hall, who had gone from actor, he's 6'4", much like a Clint Eastwood. He had transitioned into writing films. He wrote a film called Spread, which was directed by David Mackenzie, the Young Adam and Startup and Hell or High Water guy.
Oh, wow.
But I don't know if this will mean anything to you. It was released by Anchor Bay Films, which is not a strong sign. This is a movie that stars Ashton Kutcher and Anne Heche.
Ooh.
And is sort of like a dark Hollywood set sex comedy.
Of a dark Hollywood sex comedy.
Yeah, and then he wrote a movie called Paranoia that I've never heard of that stars Liam Hemsworth and Gary Oldman and Amber Heard and Harrison Ford. Wow, for a movie with Harrison Ford to
not even broken the surface,
been erased from the consciousness.
That's tough.
It's got to be bad. And then he writes American Sniper. This guy, Peter Morgan, sends him to Texas to meet Chris Kyle. What? The guy who's dead? That's right, folks. They started developing the movie before he had been killed.
Correct. Yeah. Well, this is a pretty quick turnaround from the publication of the autobiography itself, which I think came out in 2011, 2012?
Something like that. Yeah, it came out in 2012, American Sniper, the autobiography of the most lethal sniper in U.S. military history.
I read basically the first half of this piece of junk, so I'm going to be thrown to that when we're really just trying to get our bearings on what type of person is at the heart of this story.
It's pretty funny.
It's wild.
I mean, we got to give him that. It's not funny on purpose, but it's pretty funny.
It's unfortunately basically the worst caricature of this type of thinking that you can imagine. And I think you're about to tell us who first was interested in this story beyond the screenwriter. And I am just baffled by this to hear that somebody who read that book said, there's a lot here. There's something going on here.
All right. So this is going to give you a sense of the kinds of guys who like this kind of thing and the kind of thinking, the ways that the sort of Navy SEAL, Christian Avenger type of thinking, the way this ties into the broader ultra-capitalist dominator system that we're all struggling under. Peter Morgan had heard about Kyle from a childhood friend, hedge fund manager, and former Sony investor Daniel Loeb. Mm-hmm. Loeb, in turn, had heard about Kyle from a different Dallas hedge fund investor who, after Kyle came back from the war, helped him to start a business. I will get into the nature of that business later. The film does not cover the business at all. But that first hedge fund investor went to a weight loss program in California. He traveled for a weight loss program that was led by a former Navy SEAL who said, have you heard about this guy, Chris Kyle? This meeting with Jason Hall and Chris Kyle, this initial meeting, ends with Jason Hall, I guess, trying to impress Chris Kyle with the Texas Rangers he's hanging out with in a bar by showing off some of his high school or college wrestling skills.
So cool.
Jason Hall ends up wrestling some Texas Rangers on the floor of a bar. They know he's writing a book, and they're worried about the book becoming too successful, making it impossible for them to afford the rights once it's published.
Wow, okay.
This is all from a Hollywood Reporter article, by the way. But the Hollywood Reporter says nobody wanted to touch the rights to this book. There is, and we'll get into this, but I have a private nickname for this film, which more like American Cipher.
That's
because you can read
a lot about
into
that.
it a number of different perspectives. And so on the one hand, you might read the sentence and think nobody wanted to touch the rights because Hollywood is afraid of America's real heroism or something. But in fact, the problem was that Hollywood tried to make money from a lot of Iraq War stories. Movies like Green Zone and Redacted, In the Valley of Elah, or Ella, which we both watched.
We sure did.
And nobody fucking showed up. Everybody was like, we don't want that. And so they just like didn't want to invest a bunch of money in something that they had a proven track record would be unlikely to return on their investment.
Yeah, this is just a classic case of confusing pretty typical mercenary cowardice for any type of ideological project or, some type of defense of the way of Hollywood thinking.
Our superiors over there at the Michael and Us podcast, I don't mean that they are supervising us, I just mean they're better than us. Luke Savage likes to talk about how, whenever conservatives get upset about Bud Light lightly courting a gay audience, or whatever, Target selling t-shirts with rainbows on them.
Bud court.
That's a really good point you've made. And
usually Jake can't
I'm going to bring that back later. I'm going to bring that back later, and that's going to be a classic Herald.
Okay, great.
Isn't it?
Great. All right, sorry, go ahead.
Anyway, Luke Savage likes to bring up how whenever conservatives get upset about companies very superficially making overtures to marginalized groups, this is the free market that they're always crying about as well. This is companies seeing market forces telling them, hey, if you put a fucking rainbow on a pair of tactical goggles, you might sell a few more of them. Has nothing to do with the degradation of Western society or whatever. It's exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So anyway,
obviously, some of the writers on Wednesday are presumably left-leaning progressive people, but the reason that Netflix greenlights Wednesday and her sort of like trans metaphor friend is
werewolf friend,
it's just because of the old greenbacks, baby.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of wolves, we'll get to them in a minute.
Okay, I'm going to read my little line here. I should say that van wars are separate from bar fights, another SEAL staple. SEALs are pretty notorious for getting into bar scrapes, and I was no exception. I've been arrested more than once through the years, though as a general rule, charges were either never filed or quickly dismissed. All right, that was our friend Chris Kyle. We're going to get a couple more.
That's pretty cool. So there's a sense that he's in some kind of echelon where the laws of the land have a sort of a different stickiness for this kind of guy.
That's right. Why do SEALs fight so much? I haven't made a scientific study of, but I think a lot is owed to pent-up aggression. We're trained to go out and kill people, and then at the same time, we're also being taught to think of ourselves as invincible badasses. That's one of his favorite words, I'll tell you. That's a pretty potent combination.
Badass.
When you go into a bar, you'll always have someone who will poke a shoulder into you or otherwise imply you should fuck off. Happens at every bar across the world. Most people just ignore things like that.
That's not true.
If someone does that to a SEAL,
wine bars.
We're going to turn and knock you out. Thanks, Chris.
Did you ever see that movie Andre about the SEAL that's friends with Tina Majorino?
Yeah, of course. I loved that film when I was a kid. Yep.
Yeah. Do you think that SEAL would act like that in a bar?
Would never act like that in a bar.
So Hollywood doesn't want to, they don't seem interested in this book. Jason Hall says, the book was written when Chris was just back from the war, and it seemed like he had a chip on his shoulder. But I knew there was another side to this guy. So he has an actor acquaintance that he knows through mutual friends. His name is Bradley Cooper, the maestro himself.
Yeah.
He calls him up, and he says, apparently Bradley Cooper had just started his production company. So he's like, hey, I got a great project for you. And Hall tells him it was a Western. He says the character goes from being a hero to being filled with vengeance and slipping over to the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure how many Westerns this guy's seen. That's happened in some of them, but it's not like the main thing. That's
yeah.
That's like a film noir. That's more exemplary of the film noir.
It's true.
What a Hollywood Reporter says, Cooper fell for it. Quote, I loved the genre, says the actor. I loved the concept of framing it as a Western. Okay, great. So Warner Brothers options the project with Bradley Cooper to star. Because Cooper is the producer. He initially suggests Chris Pratt, which makes sense because...
dude looks just like Chris Pratt.
Has a pretty strong resemblance to Chris Pratt and is also a bumbling moron who is obsessed with Jesus Christ.
That's correct.
But Warner Brothers will only do it with Bradley Cooper. This is, at this point, it's like 2012, so this is pre-Guardian of the Galaxy or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no director attached still. And at this point, Chris Kyle dies. We will get into the circumstances of his death later in the episode.
We sure will.
But Chris Kyle
2013, he dies. February, I believe.
For a few months after Chris Kyle's funeral, it looked as if Steven Spielberg would be directing American Sniper. Spielberg had read Kyle's book and Hall's screenplay and was willing to commit to it as his next movie with DreamWorks co-producing, but he had some ideas of his own. For one thing, he wanted to focus more on the enemy sniper in the script, the insurgent sharpshooter who was trying to track down and kill Kyle. Quote, he was a mirror of Chris on the other side, Hall explains of Spielberg's version. Quote, it was a psychological duel as much as a physical duel. It was buried in my script, but Steven helped bring it out. But Spielberg's version starts to get expensive. Warner Brothers doesn't want to spend more than $60 million, and Spielberg drops out, presumably to make, I don't know, one of those Steven Spielberg movies. What came out?
Bridge of Spies. I don't know what came out in 2014 or something.
He drops out on August 5th, 2013.
Okay.
So he directed Bridge of Spies. You're right.
Mr. Movies over here. Okay, well, let me say this. Is the Mustafa part one of the most interesting, can't even call it subtextual elements, but yes, this obvious mirror. It is definitely something that deserves more attention than it gets in the film, would be my take.
I agree. I agree entirely, wholeheartedly. This character is based in part on a pseudonymous sniper called Juba, who sometimes spelled Joba, who was part of the Iraqi insurgency. He was affiliated with the Sunni insurgent group Islamic Army in Iraq and became famous after a bunch of videos turned up online showing footage of him killing American soldiers. We see sort of a replica of these videos in the film, and the kills that have been attributed to Juba are, of course, difficult to verify, debated by lots of people. And usually it's footage like from a sniper barrel, so who knows who is behind the gun, obviously. But these videos, I think, are still around. I have not watched any of them. I don't really like watching stuff like that.
Yeah. Snuff films, not one of our favorites. Although, to be clear, if you're upset by the idea of watching a film like this, consider how you feel about watching the film American Sniper by Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, exactly. So Spielberg drops out, and Russell might do it with Cooper, because this is a follow-up to Silver Lining Playbook. He's coasting off of the SLP hotness.
And it's kind of Three Kings. He's shot this type of territory before,
right.
You know.
Interestingly, earlier today, Jeremy, our friend Jeremy Allison, texted me some piece of trivia suggesting that Clint Eastwood was originally sought for the George Clooney part in Three Kings, which doesn't make a lick of sense to me. Would have been a completely different movie, but...
It was originally sought, and then they were thinking of George Clooney, and they went to
they were thinking of a guy who could conceivably walk for a long time.
Exactly.
Anyway, as Clint tells it, he gets a call from his friend, the Warner Brothers distribution chief, Dan Fellman, asking him if he's heard of Chris Kyle. Quote, he asked if I knew who Chris Kyle was, recalls Eastwood of the conversation. I said, yeah, I'm reading his book right now. Let me finish the last 30 pages and I'll call you back. Eastwood agreed to sign on, but eventually he made one big change. The studio was scheduling the picture for a Christmas 2015 release. Clint didn't want to wait that long. He pushed for Christmas 2014 instead. Extremely right cool, funny Clint Eastwood move. So now Bradley Cooper puts on 40 pounds of muscle. He watches hundreds of hours of home videos from Taya Kyle. Taya came up to somebody at Chris's funeral. I don't know if it's Jason Hall or one of the producers or Bradley Cooper or something, but says, you need to do right by him. It's how my children are going to remember their father. So you need to make this movie. You need to do it right. Which is crazy because the movie, like, she wants her children to remember their father on his fucking cell phone with, like, civilians down the barrel of his scope saying, you're a horny preggers.
Yes. Now, look, we haven't touched on this yet. I think Bradley Cooper is a marvel in this movie. Is it...
I do too.
Aimed, is the weapon that is Bradley Cooper aimed at exactly the target that I would aim at? Probably not quite, but the man is just excelling. This is what he was made for. They were small radio-controlled toys that were just a blast to drive around. Some of the Iraqis working on base had apparently never seen anything like them before. I'd drive a vehicle toward them and they would scream and bolt away. I don't know if they thought it was some sort of guided missile or what. Their high-pitched screams, coupled with sprints in the opposite direction, had me doubled over. Cheap thrills in Iraq were priceless. Some of the people we had working for us were not exactly the best of the best, nor were all of them particularly fond of Americans. they caught one jerking off into our food. Now, this is the book that these people are reading and saying, God,
I think this is cool.
Yeah. Yep.
Damn. So, to speak to your praise of Bradley Cooper, Clint's favorite moment in the film apparently is the scene where Chris Kyle talks to the psychiatrist saying he has no regrets about what he did in Iraq. Clint says it was shot in one take. I have some news for the Hollywood Reporter. That is real dog bites man shit. But Clint says, quote, in the back of Cooper's eyes, you see a slight hesitation. Bradley just lived the moment. I agree that is a good scene. Cooper says, what we tried to do is show what a soldier goes through. It's not a political movie. It's a character study. The hope is that people will understand the war in a way they didn't before. This is total narcissist actor shit. Couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, this idea that this film is saying anything new about people's experiences of war. Now, we're gonna wade fully into the morass of the question of how much of this is on screen, how much of this is intentional, and that's fine. We're gonna spend our time down there. All right. So, of course, we'll discuss this in a bit about where people's heads are at on this, making the film, watching the film, whatever. But it's impossible, basically, for me to allow somebody to say that they think that they're delving into the psychology of the experience of war in a way that hasn't been done before, even in just mainstream Hollywood cinema.
Yeah, have any of you heard of William Wellman's The Best Years of Our Lives, the Best Picture winner of 1946?
Right. Yeah, Class of Glory. Yeah. I mean, I
didn't have to look that up. I had that in my head.
Yep.
46. All Quiet on the Western Front. Have you ever heard of it? That's an even earlier film. Yeah. So, and I think there's a lot left on the table here. And as we go through the film, we can talk some more about some of this stuff. But I really think that there could have been a fascinating version of this movie made if Kyle had not died mid-production. And there could have been a very fascinating and better version of this film made if it were made 10 years later.
Correct.
Well, I guess that would be next year. 5 years later, with a little more removed from his death, a little less of the sort of public eulogy aspect.
Yeah, it becomes, I don't think it overwhelms the film, but the hagiographic stuff is so visible.
Mm-hmm. So let's go through the film, shall we?
All right, let's go through the film.
Locked in Christmas release. Had you seen this movie before?
Never seen this film before, and
didn't watch it for the episode. Oh, okay.
Very funny. Also, haven't addressed this. The film moves. This thing is on rails.
No, it does. It does move with a kind of the clip that some of the recent Clint Eastwood films have not been as concerned with. They have let things breathe a little bit. Notably, this also is, like A Perfect World or Flags of Our Fathers. I think maybe some other films. Bridges of Madison County, maybe. This is a film that originated as a Steven Spielberg project and then ended up in Clint's hands.
Yes.
And in a rarity, he did ask for rewrites to sort of trim down a lot of the stuff that Spielberg had added to the script that made the cost go up. Clint often will shoot from the first script he reads.
Loves this. We know this about Clint.
To sort of preserve that part of it that excited him. But in this case, he had it trimmed down. So I wonder if some of the go aspect is related to that. But the film moves, and we open with the famous sequence where he is looking down the barrel of his sniper's rifle. He's sort of surveying a bombed out urban scene in Iraq as like a armored vehicle and some army guys. I guess, are they Marines?
They're Marines. The guys who are knocking doors. Yes, they're Marines.
Yeah. He's performing Overwatch for them, which I understand is some kind of a video game.
That's right.
And he's out there keeping an eye on anybody who would try to cause harm to these Marines as they terrorize.
Now, this is a fairly straight dramatization of what happened in the book. There's some changes made. The young boy is modified from a toddler in the woman's arms to sort of a, 6-year-old or something. How old do we think that kid is? A little bit older?
Yeah, 6 to 8. Well, actually, There's something that happens first. And this is the first instance of the use of the phrase military-aged male, which we get a lot in this film. This is a term that dates back at least to Vietnam. I found a thing about using military-age male in Vietnam. It's sort of, I guess, the grandfather of the enemy combatant.
Of course.
Justification for killing innocent people in a foreign country by U.S. empire because they are, this is a different kind of war. Everyone could be a threat to American soldiers, and we can't trust that, just because someone doesn't have a uniform or that they aren't actively looking to kill our boys.
This framing, you're absolutely right. And of course, just to bring it back, this is a framing we're hearing right now from the IDF. Another strong bit of parallel is that they've already evacuated these areas, supposedly, right? So basically, and of course, when we say evacuated, we mean just demanded that everybody leave their homes on very, very short notice, without the resources, without a definite place to go, probably moving to safety zones that will then be asked to evacuate again. So there's already a fantasy about this being sort of like, when a hurricane's come into a city and you have 3 days and they tell you, oh, we're going to get you support and stuff. It does not resemble this at all. This is a foreign military coming in and telling you have to leave your home. Otherwise, like you're saying, you will be basically presumed to be part of the insurgent force here.
Your presence is an admission of guilt, and thus puts a reasonable doubt as to your innocence on your head in terms of the U.S. military deciding that it did the right thing. And we get Kyle, he's with his... we both watched the film Jarhead.
We did.
This is in the first Gulf War, but it gets a lot more into kind of the way that program works and focuses a lot more on this like partner aspect. Whereas here, Kyle sometimes has like buddies, but they don't figure into the movie. So the military-aged male guy disappears, and then all of a sudden a woman and a small boy come out. She's got something in her arms. It turns out to be
That's an arcade Russian grenade.
Yeah. A modification from the real story where it was a much smaller Chinese-made grenade. So in this case, it sets up much more of a moral quandary where he for sure knows. Like it makes it more justifiable for Kyle to have shot this woman. But the spotter says, you'll fry if you're wrong.
Actually, that's the second line from the spotter. We get two sort of Greek chorus things that reveal the failures of anybody who questions this type of decision making, right? So the first is that he says, that guy, the military-aged male, what if he's just calling this old lady, right? So this is to me, the naive response, the optimistic, liberal response to say these are innocents. And of course, Chris Kyle sees right through this with his clear-eyed vision of the situation. And then when he's asking for permission to fire on this woman, once he discovers that she has a grenade, that's when his partner leaps in with the second thing, right? Which is the cowardice of the soldier who's afraid of being held accountable, right? It's because with these sort of kangaroo court war crime trials.
Kind of recalls some of the Dirty Harry conversations.
Yes, exactly.
But, notably, of course, they say they'll fry you if you're wrong, and he doesn't mention at all that a woman and child will be killed if you're wrong.
And also,
if you're right, they'll be killed too. But
I doubt that that's the case. My understanding of how most of these, mistaken identity cases in war where somebody is killed in action, it seems very rare that these people are held accountable, or, if there is some type of accountability, it comes in the form of usually an honorable discharge from the army or from...
Ian's discharges are never honorable. I think we've made this joke before. So she drops the grenade and the little boy picks it up. And then before we see what happens, we cut immediately to, he's got the boy in his sights.
Yep.
We hear a shot ring out, but then we cut to a flashback. And this is Kyle's first kill. He shoots a deer, an innocent, while hunting with his father.
Yes.
And runs over to the deer and drops his gun, and his father says, "You never leave your rifle in the dirt." So it's like the American flag or a yarmulke. It cannot touch the ground. It's a holy object.
That's right. And speaking of Jarhead, I think we've seen this in other military films. Can't recall off the top of my head, but this is my rifle. There's many like it, but this is mine, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
Now, this comes up in the book. I think it's an interesting bit of business that Chris Kyle and his family had a deer lease where they would go to hunt. Now, I have had to confront in my recent life, the last few years, people who truly are hunting to survive. I have never encountered this in my life. Now, you and I aren't meat eaters, but I do understand that there are people for whom protein is in short supply, and they're hopefully responsibly picking animals that they see in abundance around them and killing them to eat them and to use every bit of it. I almost asked you about hunting in our 2-question segment, but I think to me this is much more interesting, much more relevant to our discussion, that even if they would make that claim about their use of the meat, if you are living in a comfortable suburban or suburban rural adjacent home and renting a special area of land just so you can go kill with your inappropriately young sons. In the book, he also talks about his first guns, basically.
Yeah, he learned to shoot a gun before he could ride a bicycle. This is an anecdote that I've seen repeated.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
So this is not, this is about using this texture, the superficial illusion of necessity to justify just the exercising of your basest instincts. What his father positively calls, I'm not sure I've ever heard this phrasing. He says some people are given the gift of aggression.
Yep. I mean, we get this linkage, right? And it's interesting because Clint, of course, the famous vegetarian, but we get this linkage between something in a state of nature.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And Kyle was referring to savages, apparently a lot more in the book than in the movie, although he does use the term savages in the movie.
Several times in the film, but yes, in the book, it's a big one.
And, we I think at this point get some more Kyle back. We see him as a young rodeo cowboy. So his life, his worldview is one of dominance, right? Because he's literally like holding on to this bucking animal, this like... the most uncivilized creature. So we then get this famous line. I was looking up the line, wasn't I? Of American. Oh, don't play the Percy Jackson trailer. Fuck you. Click the wrong thing. Okay, so Wayne Kyle says this to his son. There are 3 types of people in this world: sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. Some people prefer to believe that evil doesn't exist in the world, and if it ever darkened their doorstep, they wouldn't know how to protect themselves. Those are the sheep. And while he's saying this, we're cutting to a scene of Chris Kyle's younger brother getting beat up and Chris stepping in. Then you've got predators who use violence to prey on the weak. They're the wolves. And then there are those blessed with the gift of aggression, an overpowering need to protect the flock. These men are the rare breed who live to confront the wolf. They are the sheepdog. And then he takes his belt off and says, like, if I catch either of you being a wolf, I'll beat you to death or whatever. And these are to 8-year-old boys.
Correct. Now, can I offer a little bit of balance? Another quote from our friend Chris Kyle, or 2, in fact.
Please.
We started getting worried, not that war would break out, but that it would start without us. And then, of course, after he engages in his first bit of combat, his first battle, he says, "Fuck," I thought to myself. "This is great. I fucking love this. It's nerve-wracking and exciting, and I fucking love it."
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool he said that stuff. So this is sort of the worldview that we're operating with. Chris Kyle clearly thinks of himself as...
badass protector.
And I think a badass protector, I don't know how much, I haven't looked too much into the exact stripe of Texan Christianity that his family belonged to. I know his father was a pastor, but I don't know if it's capital C, capital D, Christian dominionism, but you certainly get a sense of Christian dogma that posits that certain people are born with divinely given dominion over the world and other people. And, I think I've talked about this on the show before, but I find it always makes me uncomfortable whenever there are comparisons of types of people to different types of animals.
Yep.
I've talked about this with, this is my problem with the film Zootopia.
Yep.
Well, first of all, they don't show any of the animals naked. The sexy animals.
You found some websites that remedy that, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, judyhopstruth.com. But Ian's looking at cheap flights to Shanghai to go to the new Zootopia land at Shanghai Disneyland to commit suicide by cop. Suicide by cop who's like a sexy bunny with a big ass.
That's Correct. Yep.
Sorry.
That's my big plan.
But this is my problem with that film, which, it's using this animal metaphor to suggest that we can transcend our innate instincts or something and be better than the animal inside us and don't judge a book by its cover and all these things. But an essential part of that allegory is that in that movie, for example, basically black people are represented by predators.
Yeah.
And so the idea is it's
people are the way they are.
It's suggesting, there is literally some genetic difference. That there is a real factual genetic basis for race, and that if you look at the DNA of a black person, it will have predatory genes in it, which is fucked. And I think the same thing is it's dangerous in similar ways to think of yourself as being given the gift of aggression, being separate from the sheep and ordained to protect them.
I think you have to do this type of categorical thinking. I do want to say, if you are going to be a person who kills, we'll say, at least 150 people. Now, the reason he gives in the film almost exclusively is to say that he's protecting, like you said, his fellow soldiers, he's Marines.
Serving his country. Calls it the greatest country in the world. He's born to protect. Correct. Yeah.
And he says, we're not just protecting this strip of dirt or whatever. He's talking, of course, about the country that they are occupying and supposedly bringing democracy to. But he makes it clear that what he's worried about, like when he comes back to see Taya later in the film, is that they are the dikes holding back the great tide of violence and savagery represented by these countries.
And is this some of the language you've picked up from reading this damn book, Ian, that you would use a word like that? Come on. I'm kidding. Hey, come on. Speaking of dikes, by the way, rest in peace, Henry Kissinger bombed the dikes in North Vietnam. Just kidding. Rest in the fires of hell.
Correct.
I've decided to believe in hell because of Henry Kissinger.
Mm-hmm.
But this sets up, this guy's worldview, which is not really questioned and carried through for the remainder of the film. And, even we see his home life, we see the way that he is, it shows up when he first meets Taya. There's a certain, Texas gentleman type thing he's trying to project, that he's courteous, he's chivalrous in all the ways that feel very condescending and reifying of patriarchy and all this stuff. She pushes back a little bit, she exerts a kind of, from seeing Taya Kyle, and she's very heavily featured in a lot of the behind the scenes stuff and the sort of making of stuff. She seems to have been a big part of the production of this movie. She's got a giant jeweled cross necklace at all times. Yep. Her hair is always done up. She really, look, I said this to you off mic, I'm going to say it on mic. They really look like swingers.
Yeah.
They give the impression of being Texas swingers.
I do want to say that the scene you're talking about in the film, in the book, of course, he offers us the line that when he first saw his wife, she was wearing leather pants that were both smoking hot and classy, which I like a lot. Now, I want to return to your more important question, because I think what we have to ask is, yes, this film is bringing these things up. Yes, you already intelligently referenced, I think, the most positive receptions of this film from the type of people we agree with or respect are looking at this film as a cipher, a film which is offering these things either unbiasedly or sort of uncritically, just kind of leaving them on the table for you to engage with as you wish.
Yeah.
Now, one of the reasons that, although I think there is a fair amount in the film, and I'm not going to say there's nothing there to sort of feed this reading, what you correctly described is that there is no moment where this is proven not to be the case, or that this is proven to be the source of a type of thinking that leads to regret, that leads to suffering. Now, obviously, the other question is, well, if there are these attacks on people in Iraq, although I don't think that he's particularly concerned with that, attacks on people in the United States
not at all.
In the form of September 11th, which will come up later in the film, what are we supposed to do, right?
What year?
I think I've said in the past that I think we could do a better job of trying to step outside our assumptions and consider what other people are wrestling with. And I think one of the things they're wrestling with is, well, how are we supposed to respond to a situation like this? Now, in the film, if there is something interesting, I think it's the fact that in, I think, several of the clips where he hears about these attacks on the United States, the first one, which we'll talk about in just a second here, they say it's still unknown who's behind these attacks. And when, of course, they're watching the planes fly into the Twin Towers, this is obviously a moment where we had very little sense of why this was happening. And for him, it's still clear motivation. In the book, he jumps in his car, roars down the road. A policeman pulls him over, and he says, like, I'm a SEAL. I'm driving to the base. And the cop lets him go and says, go get some fucking payback.
He's got a ball. He balances a ball on his nose to prove it to the cop. Go get some fucking payback. Jesus Christ.
Which, again, it's just, to me, underlining the fact that this is totally unrelated to any sense of like who these people are, why we need to do this.
Right.
Which is why it belies this idea that, oh, we're doing it because there's no other choice. These people don't even really have a goddamn clue what's happening, right? That's not part of the thought process.
I want to point out a couple of things. First of all, the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and in Nairobi, Kenya, which have been associated in some way with Osama bin Laden's imprimatur or whatever. These are, in the film, the thing that gets him to join up.
Fake never happened.
Fake never happened. But I do think it's interesting, and it does lend credence to the idea that this is, in some way, condemnation of the Chris Kyle mindset. By the way, our ebook, The Chris Kyle Mindset, is available for $49.99 on our website, podcastforme.com.
Become millionaires, yeah.
Yeah. But he says, like, look what they did to us.
He says, if I may, what do they do to us? What do they do to us?
And the irony there is that nearly everyone who's killed in the bombings,
I think it's like 213
out of
people 200
killed,
something people.
Yeah, 12 Americans killed, and everyone else out of 200 and something were Kenyans, Tanzanians, not American citizens, people who worked at the embassies who were from the countries where the embassies were located. And he is immediately upset that, and granted, I would like to put on the record, this is not the Pod Casty position, this is me speaking as an individual, but I am against the bombing of embassies.
Sure. Yes, as am I.
Abroad.
But I think what you're saying is that it's a massive, immediate simplification of the situation, dehistoricization of the situation.
Yes. And the same thing with 9/11. You do get this kind of, when the 9/11 scene in the film, he's already in the SEALs, and Taya, played by Sienna Miller, gives this, oh no! This real goofy, oh my God, I can't believe what they did to us sort of outburst. And, you know, listening to, of course, the Far Superior Blowback podcast, the podcast.
Yes, we mentioned this basically every single episode, but this time I have to insist that if you are curious about the real origins of this war, about the circumstances behind it, now you have 2 seasons of Blowback done to help you understand it. The first...
Yeah, seasons 1 and 4.
Exactly.
And then season 2 of Blowback is mostly set at the docks, and a lot of people say it's the worst, but I think it's secretly going to be one of the best seasons of Blowback.
Ziggy, of course, makes his big appearance there.
Ziggy Sabatka. Frank Sabatka, by the way, going to show up in Sully next week. Isn't that exciting? Right.
Very exciting. So,
but in both cases, the Iraq War, most famously, a totally ludicrous, completely unrelated, like just the most tenuous bullshit connection to 9/11, none whatsoever. And the idea that, honestly, the idea that sending huge numbers of troops to fight like a couple of guys.
Yep.
I mean, there's even a moment in Blowback season 1 where they play a clip of a professor, sort of expert in terrorism, who talks about the notion of Al-Qaeda being sort of bullshit in itself, that you can join Al-Qaeda, you can like sign up to become a card-carrying member of Al-Qaeda, because it's much closer to just a network of related but loosely affiliated and somewhat competitive cells that share information and funding. And it's sort of like considering all of the nations, like all of the US's like individual private security firms, as like an army or something like that.
I mean,
but it's even less organized than that.
Perfect example. We're going to talk about, well, we don't have to talk about it, but Sarkawi comes up later in the film, but a guy who is very demonstrative of this, right? He sort of like comes in and out, overlaps somewhat an ideology, gets trained, goes against them.
Well, but let's talk about it, because the film, I think, sort of does the work for the U.S. military industrial complex by referring to AQI, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, without giving any context for what that is. And that's a Al-Qaeda in Iraq is basically like it's a militia that existed unrelated to, like, not terribly related to any organization affiliated with bin Laden, who then decided to affiliate itself with bin Laden for political gain and material gain and all that. It's an association of convenience or of mutual advantage, rather than, being like Al-Qaeda's embassy in Iraq, which is what the film, I think, would like you to think it is.
Yeah, I'm going to read very, very briefly from a different book. This is not a man whom we support, but to demonstrate an awareness of the type of thinking you can do if you're not limited to sort of like really basic categories. You're saying correctly that the United States not only made a mistake in terms of believing that there might be WMDs or believing that there might be association between Saddam Hussein, they very intentionally ignored the lack of intelligence that they had, and then waged, we now understand, a very conscious campaign to make these connections in the mind of the American people to justify invading Iraq. This time,
they lied.
Yeah, they lied.
Just lots of lying with, in many cases, the full enthusiastic cooperation of the media, most of whom are still in positions of power, which is exactly why we have the situation in Gaza that we have right now, where Israel has, I think, as of today, killed 20,000 people.
David Frum's The Atlantic, have you heard of it? The New York Times, have you heard of it?
Literally, the entire world is against it, except for the people in power.
So let me read really quickly. We as Muslims have a strong feeling that binds us together. We feel for our brothers in Palestine and Lebanon. When 60 Jews are killed inside Palestine, he was talking about Palestinian suicide bombings in Israel, all the world gathers within 7 days to criticize this action, while the deaths of 600,000 Iraqi children did not receive the same reaction. And then a little bit later, killing those Iraqi children is a crusade against Islam. We as Muslims do not like the Iraqi regime, but we think that the Iraqi people and their children are our brothers, and we care about their future. That is, of course, Osama bin Laden talking about the ways in which...
I heard about him on TikTok.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. He's kind of making a little comeback here. Now, again, my point is not to lionize his analysis, but just to show the massive gulf between his analysis and that of Chris Kyle, who, again, in his book says a lot of people saying that there weren't actually WMDs, but there was a bunch of other bad weapons there. So what's the difference? He effectively says this.
Now, I feel crazy, and it feels almost silly, almost elementary, almost a superficial reading, or, it feels like maybe a stupid, obvious thing to say. But the U.S. is the wolf. I mean, if anyone is like, it's so insane to see yourself being like, because there's so many times in the film where Chris Kyle is over there, again, extraordinarily high-powered rifle, position of profound safety, hiding. Man is the human embodiment of that meme about Yoda going back for more olives at 2:08 a.m. He just cannot stop going back to Iraq to kill people. But like, he's there while a bunch of guys with like the most sophisticated military technology in the world, basically a bottomless pit of money. I guess a money pit is a bad thing, but like an unending stream of money being given to them to re-up and advance their weaponry. They have flown so fucking far away, the other side of the world, to basically go door to door, just like throwing everyone's shit everywhere, fucking people up, killing civilians, killing, in many cases, like 18, 19-year-olds who may have joined a militia because of the circumstances of their lives. And this guy is here picking off anybody who would dare take a pot shot at one of these guys with like an old Russian rifle they found that doesn't fucking work. And he's suggesting that he is protecting them and says like, how dare these guys shoot at us? And it's like, motherfucker, how are any of these people threatening your family? Like, this is so far away from you.
Yeah.
I know I may be just repeating Bush era Jon Stewart, monologue, but it bears repeating.
Yeah, and
it bears
if
repeating.
He is the sheepdog, who are the people that he's protecting, like you're saying? Because Americans are not in danger, seemingly. He does not care about the sheep. In fact, I would go so far as to say he despises the sheep, the local sheep in the form of the Iraqi people. And
also the sheep back at home, because he says, you're all going to the mall. You don't know that there's a war going on.
Yes.
And at no point does he think, well, if people don't know that there's a war going on, how threatened are they by the war? It would seem that the war maybe has nothing to do with protecting American lives.
He loves in the film to talk about evil, this evil bitch who threatens the soldiers, the evil that is coming down on the Iraqi people. Right. But this is like confirmation bias, the movie, right? Basically, what we get is every time there's a critical scene later where he is led into somebody's home and invited to join, a meal for Eid. This is like a very rare moment in the film where the Iraqi people are being humanized, right? Maybe one of, I'm going to truly say 3 or 4 moments.
Right.
And wouldn't you believe it, but this damn Iraqi piece of shit is one of these guys.
It's all a ruse. Well, yeah, they even refer to the woman as the woman from the beginning as by the way, it turns out he does shoot the boy.
Yeah.
But they refer to the woman at the beginning of like as this evil bitch that would sort of bring her child into this situation. Yeah. So there is some suggestion of the innocence of the child. Does he shoot the kid in the ankle?
No, he does not. Yeah.
But when and this gets back to some of our conversations we've had about things like Stockholm Syndrome, things like the origins of violence by oppressed peoples. If you listen to Blowback, going back for decades and decades, the situations, the circumstances that have allowed the people in Iraq who would dominate and brutalize other people, all of these people were armed and motivated and installed and protected, supported by the United States. People like Saddam Hussein. There's, of course, the famous photo of Donald Rumsfeld in Saddam's palace, like shaking his hand. But the history of the Middle East in the 20th century is a history of the support of corrupt plutocrats, often over popular uprisings that were too left-leaning for the West's comfort. And so even Saddam Hussein, who was, I think, a bad guy, from what I can tell, he seems like he was, like, I don't like a lot of the stuff that he did. He doesn't get the chance to be put in power without the U.S. The U.S. is the bully. The U.S. is the first wolf in this situation.
The book that I was reading from that Osama bin Laden quote is Robert Fisk's Great War for Civilization. Wonderful book. Don't know why this incredible tome that seems impossible to believe the types of stuff this journalist was present for. Don't know why this is not a film, but a big part of what he talks about is exactly what you're describing, Jake, just how confusing it is to be a person who basically doesn't get your understanding of the world from CNN, somebody who has actually been present in these places, how confusing it is to hear people talk about places like Iran, which I think to this day, probably alone with North Korea, even China, I think, is not in the same category in terms of how we talk about it as a fundamental evil, right? Something that is evil down to its roots.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with the famous book, All the Shah's Men. Wonderful exploration of why the U.S. Deposed the democratically elected moderate leader there in the 50s, and particularly why the UK did it in support of, I think, BP investment in the region. But there is no discussion of where these people came from without discussion of Western influence. So it's crazy to talk about this like just something we had to do, right?
Aren't most of these national boundaries drawn up by the British Empire?
Correct. Yeah.
In the interest of oil and various other extractive industries? Let's see. Major points in the film. So we keep cutting to Mustafa, this enemy sniper who does not have any lines in the film.
Sneaker wearing guy. You said Jason Bourning around the rooftops. That was correct. Man's got something that is somehow both like a sniper rifle from Star Wars, Han Solo looking ass sniper rifle that is also from like 1935. It's
and they talk about how they say he was an Olympic sniper.
Yeah,
and apparently he's from Syria. And I would argue that the film is much less a Western than kind of a sports movie in its structure. I'm serious. Because
I laugh because I know immediately what you're talking about in terms of seeing these two teams, seeing this guy develop his skills. Quote from Chris Kyle: "The purpose of war, as Patton put it, is to make the other dumb bastard die. But we also want to fight. Part of it is personal. It's the same way for athletes. An athlete wants to be in a big game, wants to compete on the field or in the ring. But another part, a bigger part, I think, is patriotism." So that is Chris Kyle just confirming everything you said about your sports film reading.
Thank you. Because these two guys, it's a battle of prowess, right? Like being a sniper it's not brave. It's about technical proficiency. It's about skill. Yep. But the other guy, this guy's a lot braver than fucking Chris Kyle. He's got no armor on. He's running around.
Yep.
He has a wife and child, we see in the film, who are living in Iraq. They're not safely in Coronado, California.
7,000 miles away.
Talking to Chris Kyle on a fucking satellite phone. He's on his goddamn cell phone while at war, and there's any question about like who is the bully here, you know?
And I'm going to preempt those listening who are going to say, well, look at all you're talking about this. Don't you think this is in the film? It is in the film, but it's just impossible for me to buy that as the primary message of the film. I'm not even talking about intentionality, just like the primary takeaway of the film for most viewers, because of course the single most climactic moment in the film is when Chris Kyle shoots Mustafa, when he snipes him over 2,100 yards, whatever.
He fully used the forks. He used the forks loose.
He used the forks loose.
Full on. He turns off his targeting computer. Yep. There's no way he could have seen this guy. It's like pure cosmic. It's like God's will that animates him.
And it's an artistic choice because this is a conflation of two events. There was a real super distance shot, I think at or around 2,100 yards, where Chris Kyle shot some RPG wielding guy or something. I forget. But it's a choice to say, we're going to take that event and combine it with this event, like you're saying, you know, sort of straightforward, classic artistic juxtaposition to say, okay, he is defeating this man in one-on-one battle in this even playing field, demonstrating the superiority of our force.
Yeah. And so he beats the guy. Then there is a sandstorm. The face of Imhotep appears.
That's right.
Hundreds of stories high, swallowing the biplane. No, there's a sandstorm, and they're sort of surrounded in this. It's supposed to be a date factory after he kills this guy.
Right there in Santa Clarita.
Yeah, they're trying to find al-Zarqawi. Honestly, I feel like we don't even need to talk about al-Zarqawi, except to say that it's just a figure that is so far removed from any of the ostensible goals of anyone at the outset of... Like on September 12th, 2001, how the fuck do you get to invading Iraq to find al-Zarqawi, you know?
Well, it's this backwards justification. Zarqawi doesn't even really come along until we've already deposed Saddam. Like that's when his influence is really exercised. So, you know, hard not to say we did another whoopsie. But this is the type of thing that Chris Kyle will, in the book, he says, he makes reference to the famous oxymoron of military intelligence. Dude, your whole thing is that you are killing people. Your ROE is based on this understanding that the people you are killing are the bad guys. And at the same time, you are trying to say, like, look at how awful these people are. Now, Zarqawi, as far as I understand it...
He does say bad guys. He does use the term bad guys.
He does. And I understand that he is a bad guy. The point of this is not to whitewash the reputations of bad religious fundamentalist insurgents, very violent people in Iraq. But the point is, how is this guy mocking and also sort of coming up with these explanations after the fact, this like post hoc justification for why he knew he should have done this stuff, while at the same time highlighting the lack of information that's available to him in the moment. It's just too confused. The lack of internal logic makes it, to me, impossible to say this is like an interesting exploration of the difficult moral choices that this man was making.
Exactly. We should maybe transition to the coming home part.
Let's do it.
Like Yoda going back for the olives. Kyle keeps returning to Iraq. He does 4 tours.
Yep.
And despite the protestations of his wife, despite Taya Kyle begging him to come home, there's just more and more children keep coming out of the 2 of them. He, as I mentioned, he refers to his wife as a horny preggers.
Mm-hmm.
He keeps going forth and multiplying. There's 4 children. There's, of course, the famous fake baby scene where she is arguing with him that he needs to come home. Your family's here. Come protect your family here.
Yep.
Which is, again, one of the parts of the film that at least outwardly, superficially gestures at the fact that his motivations are more narcissistic than legitimate.
Yep.
The baby looks bad. I don't know what you want me to tell you.
Not an interesting thing.
This is a thing people cite as evidence that Clint Eastwood is like a lazy filmmaker or something, which I think is just silly.
I told you that I thought,
I don't know. Not interested.
Up until the CG movement of the arm, which is, I will say,
a little CG
a little
wiggle.
bit distracting.
Well, and then you get Bradley Cooper bouncing the arm with his finger, which I think is like sort of stagey.
Well, that's what I was about to say. Everything else in the exchange is kind of endearingly theatrical to me. It's like a 2-hander scene. They're moving around this very limited space. They have this, what is very clearly a prop.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine. Whatever. This is not the type of stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, where are we going to stop? Like, do you know that the people in the scene aren't even the real people this happened to?
Yeah.
Like, it's fake. Like, he's not really killing people in the rest of the movie either. Shut up.
Correct. Exactly.
You're being a little baby.
Yes,
you're being a whiny
you are,
baby.
In fact, the fake baby here.
You're the fake baby. Anyway, but he refuses to come home until, as the film tells it, this sort of during the sandstorm scene where shit hits the fan in like a really big way, and he tells his wife on the phone. Again, he's able to be on the phone with his wife, but he tells her, like, I'm ready to come home. It seems like in real life, what actually happened is his wife told him that she was going to leave him if he didn't stop going to Iraq so much.
Yes. Yep.
And so he comes home, and we get some scenes of him having trouble readjusting to civilian life, some PTSD stuff. As we've mentioned, I think Cooper is good in these scenes. There's, of course, the private first class Jonathan Groff tells him, you saved my life.
Extremely distracting choice.
Jonathan Groff is bad. I don't like watching him act. It's very fake.
I don't know anything about the man. He may be lovely. He's
Hamilton, isn't he?
That's true. I guess I meant something outside
that's a stain.
It's true. It's an artistic
That's a stain on the soul.
Yeah.
That's beet juice, I guess, on the soul.
That's enough to explain what my resentment about him being in this film is he's Hamilton. So it's confusing.
But there is a great line in that where they're leaving. I mean, Cooper does a great job of being visibly uncomfortable and trying to get through an interaction in a way that shows, the standard, familiar for many a war movie, many a coming home movie, the kind of discomfort with civilians saying thank you for your service and not knowing what that means or whatever. But he does get to say the line to his son, don't forget your lizard there.
It's great.
Got a lizard out of like a gotcha pond.
I mean, I like this part.
Get your lizard there.
This car wash stuff. Yeah, it's all compelling because Bradley Cooper as Chris Kyle is compelling.
Yeah, and then I said the phrase already. You and I watched a film that was written and directed by Jason Hall after this movie called Thank You for Your Service.
Correct.
Starring Miles Teller, which gets much more to it actually focuses on the difficulty that especially Iraq veterans have in coming home in a way that I think people, especially the people involved in making the movie, but even in the pull quotes from reviews at the time, which I think were also sort of in the guy was recently murdered. They're in the wave of sympathy for the murdered guy. But even, David Denby in the New Yorker or whatever will say that the film is a gripping story of trauma and the difficulty of coming home. And I just don't think there's that much of that in the movie. There's so much of the movie is him not coming home.
And I mean, you're comparing it to this other film, which I think you and I agreed was inferior in terms of watchability, enjoyment, acting, most of the other elements. But it's so obviously a film that is much more concerned with what you're describing. And it
spends the time.
Yeah, it spends the time. It looks at different aspects of something. It's hard to really feel like, well, isn't this something when it's so gestural to me. It's so superficial. I mean, Hurt Locker, not a film made by somebody whose politics I think are particularly nuanced or interesting, but
right. Who does make a War on Terror movie starring Chris Pratt around the same time.
Does basically this same thing in about 2 minutes at the end of the film. So this is just to tell you how quickly you can get this same amount of work done.
So, there's this moment, the good scene with the psychiatrist who says, I've got soldiers all up and down this hospital who could use your help, and basically says, these guys will look up to you. You have a responsibility to do what you can for your fellow veterans. Now, I have done a small amount of work with veterans through my job. There are all lots of things that you can do with veterans who have been traumatized by their experiences that are helpful, humane, the kinds of things that we as a society should be doing to help the people who have been used by the U.S. empire and extracted from, turned into husks of themselves, had pieces of themselves blown off. For example, in my job capacity, I have been part of trips to take a bunch of vets on a little cruise around Long Beach Harbor. Some folks who haven't been on a boat since they were in Vietnam, some folks who've never been on a boat, and everyone gets to enjoy some like orange juice from concentrate and donuts and say, look at that over there, and feel the sea breeze on their face, and it's a nice time. There are plenty of organizations that link up vets with PTSD with shelter dogs who often also have PTSD. And there's plenty of mutual benefit for both of the dog and the vet in there.
Yeah,
there's all kinds of shit.
I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Neither are you. It seems to me pretty clear that what you would not want to do is reaffirm what they have been taught is basically their only value as a human being is to become a weapon to dehumanize everybody around them,
and to take people who are extremely jumpy and easily triggered and set off really loud noises next to them. Like, it's so fucking crazy that the thing he thinks to do is to take vets shooting. Now we have the scene of there's a guy who uses a wheelchair. I think a number of these folks who appear in the movie are actual
yes, this is one of the big
veterans
choices.
Themselves. We also have a couple of folks in the cast who were real associates, Navy SEAL associates of Chris Kyle, who play themselves, essentially Kevin Lass or Lace or something, which is sort of looks ahead
1517 to Paris.
To 1517 to Paris, yes. But we have these actual wounded vets, and one of them is shooting a gun and says, really feels like my balls came back or something like that, which is not the kind of thing that is going to help people. And so then at the end of the film, when Chris Kyle goes to, some woman who parks cars at his kid's school, which, first of all, do they have a valet at the school? What the fuck does that mean?
Do not know.
But anyway, he meets a woman through his kid's school whose son is a vet who has been having a hard time, and Chris says he's going to take the guy out shooting. And then we get this final card on the screen that says Chris Kyle was killed that day by a veteran he was trying to help.
Now, this is a potentially dramatically interesting resolution. This is where it gets confusing, is that the story itself inherently fascinating to say that these people who were turned into weapons maybe already had existing mental health issues that led them to be interested in being in the military in the first place, and then of course were made that much worse by being over there. That's a fascinating conclusion, right? And it's a fascinating, even the scene you were talking about where the guy is firing a sniper rifle and says, I feel so good, it's like my balls just grew back or something. That is a fascinating exploration of how much of this man's self-worth has been invested in his sense of masculinity, which is also where his self-worth lies, is invested in this single expression of himself. But I guess we have to get into kind of lofty question of when is a piece of art actually exploring something that is represented in that piece of art. Yeah.
Depicting.
And I guess I would need any type of like, to use the sniper term, like a crosswind, any type of texture that, so any type of silence, a pause, a sense of irony, anything that tells me that this movie is interested in how ridiculous that is or how strange that is.
We don't get this at all.
No.
And what instead we get a guy who is playing evil derangement on his face, like the creepiest guy.
Yep.
So, and then we get to see Sienna Miller, regarding, something's off here.
Yeah.
And then it cuts to black. Now, in real life, there's a guy named Eddie Ray Routh who was a Marine Corps veteran. He had been in and out of mental hospitals. He had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. He had had problems before he was in the military. The kind of person who should not have been, well, no one should be in the military, but certainly this guy, this is the kind of thing where because of the pressures put on the U.S. government and because of their failings in Iraq, it got easier and easier.
Fill out the rank
to get into there.
They decreased their standards for previous criminal records, all sorts of stuff.
Yes.
Go on.
On the way to the shooting range, Kyle had texted Chad Littlefield, who was a guy with him who was also murdered. This dude is straight up nuts.
Yeah.
Littlefield said, "Watch my 6."
Yes. Which also so fascinating that these dudes...
First of all, I think that means Chris Kyle was texting while driving, which we are opposed to. Now, Routh, while it appears that while Kyle and Chad Littlefield were like walking down the range to replace paper targets or something, Routh shot them both in the back with 2 different weapons, both of which belonged to Chris Kyle.
Mm-hmm.
So he had so many fucking guns on him.
Yep.
That just like being in Iraq, you're so far from being victimized here. I know you've been shot by this mentally ill man, but like you brought so many guns with you, you left them on a fucking table. You could send this guy down the range to change the targets himself. Also, what are you doing? This is one of the guys. This is if someone is having mental illness struggles while on top of PTSD from their military training, this is exactly the kind of person who could benefit from a different type of therapy than shooting.
Yeah. I'm going to quote Routh himself, who said in the aftermath, "I was just riding in the backseat of the truck and nobody would talk to me. They were just taking me to the range, so I shot them. I feel bad about it, but they wouldn't talk to me. I'm sure they've forgiven me." Now,
yeah, then he goes to a Taco Bell and buys some burritos. But all of the prosecutors in the aftermath of this do their best to somehow try to prove that he was not insane.
I believe they succeed, if I'm not mistaken.
Which is just, and he is currently at the Ramsey unit, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's Ramsey unit in Brazoria County, Texas, which is a prison farm and not any kind of treatment center for someone who has a lot of mental illness.
And unless they have amended his sentence, I believe he was sentenced to life without parole for this situation. Now, obviously, again, I want to say that to me, this is such a fascinating distillation of this idea that you've taken people and fundamentally changed their relationship to violence, the acceptability of violence as an expression. In the book, Chris Kyle will not shut up about how much these guys haze each other, not in any kind of like cute way. It's much closer to, I both watched Jarhead, like you said. It's just straight up, these guys are just beating each other. And
just more recently, there's been all kinds of controversy and lots of people resigning large-scale investigations of the Navy SEAL training program after several people died doing Navy SEAL training because they were being pushed to the limit by people who've bought into this insane idea of machismo, an insane idea of bodily superiority or something.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say friend of the show because she's probably never heard of the show, but I'm going to say a person I'm a fan of and who made a t-shirt that I bought you once, Aisha Siddiqui. She, I believe, once said on Twitter that she has a very difficult time watching films that are focused on the lasting damage that these types of imperial or colonial occupation wars do to the American soldiers. I understand this completely, of course, because you're taking not the aggressor themselves, right? I will maybe go so far as to say like these people don't have a fleshed out understanding. In fact, many of them may be mentally ill to such a degree that they don't totally understand what is happening. But
right, I mean, there's the Sarsgaard character in, there's no draft.
Right.
But the Sarsgaard character in Jarhead, for example, is given the classic choice of jail or the army, or jail or the military, and joins the military. It's not like many of at least the infantry, given the state of the U.S. economy, it's not like everyone in the army has a great choice.
But I think she's right in saying that.
But Chris Kyle certainly did.
Yeah, and I think she's right in saying that what turns them into the beings that they ultimately become, these people who are suffering, and I think who deserve to be taken out on a nice boat ride and drink some orange juice from Concentrate, because whether or not...
Give them some real ass orange juice from Orange, okay.
Great. The fact is that the thing that haunts them, right, is the violence that they have conducted against these real people. I mean, we see all these events.
Yeah.
The, of course, the famous documentary, The Invisible War, I think it's called, where male soldiers are raping women in the armed forces. There's several very, very famous, I mean, not just Abu Ghraib, but other famous instances of rape in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, mass killings. This is not a new thing. This is in Vietnam films. This is
one of the people that had to step down as head of the Navy SEAL something or other was himself had a record of like covering up SEALs who had tried to behead captive Taliban soldiers. I mean, it's rampant. The whole thing is rotten to the core.
That's what I was going to say. This is not an aberration. And I think that is the other thing that I object to in films that are saying, look what's happening to these poor guys. This is not like some type of awful side effect, some kind of unpredictable consequence. This is fundamental to the process that we're putting them through. So I don't know. I'm very sympathetic to the frustration that when we look at that, we're looking at it as like victims of a natural disaster or something, and just saying, well, we sort of had to deal with the situation. I think victims of a natural disaster, they do deserve care to be turned back into human beings as much as possible.
Right. I mean, we support the troops so much that we want them to be
to not be the troops,
given the opportunity to be something other than troops, and we want no one in the future to be made into a troop ever again. We support the people who are, as we all are, cogs of some sort or really grist for the great imperial mill, getting the shit ground out of us.
We're not looking for the optimized version of imperial war. We're not looking for the version that doesn't do this to people. I mean, the thing about Chris Kyle as a sniper that I also think is interesting is post-Obama drone war era, it's so fascinating to think about, like you're saying, people who have to make these quote-unquote difficult moral choices from relative safety. And in a situation where there's no element of immediate bodily harm, at least to that person, Chris Kyle makes a lot.
Snipers are not brave. This is what I want to get. And you know how I know that. You know how I feel so confident. Whenever I play a first-person shooter, I am a sniper because I'm a coward and I don't want to lose. It's easy. It's easy, and it's like truly for cowards and little wieners like me. And what's so insane about the movie is it ends with real footage of the real funeral procession through Texas to the fucking Cowboys Stadium where Chris Kyle's funeral was held. And so many people come out in the rain to pay homage to this guy whose accomplishment is killing 160 people. It's not like he dragged 160 soldiers out of harm's way. He just went, and I mean, this is how profound Islamophobia is in America, I guess. But like the man's heroism is linked specifically to his deadliness.
Yeah.
Michael Moore said as much. He said something on Twitter about how snipers are not heroes, to which Sarah Palin took particular umbrage. And she said on her Facebook page, "You're not fit to shine Chris Kyle's combat boots." Maybe his casual boots. Michael Moore might be able to shine those. Unclear.
We haven't addressed the famous aspect of the Chris Kyle story, which is, of course, he's being a terrible liar. A
big fucking moron liar.
Munchausen type figure. So before I just say that to preface this defense of who he is, right? It's not just based on his killing, but his fabrication of his own identity, right? His own mythos.
So Palin says Hollywood leftists are spitting on the graves of freedom fighters who allow you to do what you do. First of all, that's not what freedom fighter means.
It's true. Yeah.
Second, she says, may the epic American sniper bring nothing but blessings to Taya and the children of this true American hero. By the way, supposedly, all of the proceeds from the book were going to go to the Chris Kyle Foundation, and there was several investigations that showed that like something like 8% of them did, and then several $1 million.
Oh no shit!
Went ahead and ended up in the Taya Kyle Personal Stuff Foundation.
Well, the amount of money that didn't end up in Jesse Ventura's pocket.
Right. So there's a couple of lies that we need to talk about. The first one, in the book, Chris Kyle tells a story about beating up an unnamed individual he calls Scruff Face.
This is characteristic of the type of poor prose that he offers. A scruff face, just a real nothing.
Hard to say all the F's after each other. And Jesse Ventura, the body, the mind, former Minnesota governor, star of Predator.
James Adomian himself.
Sexual Tyrannosaurus.
Oh.
Sues the estate, I believe, because he had died at that point, for defamation because...
Kyle goes on Opie and Anthony and makes it clear that the person he's talking about is Jesse Ventura.
Jesse Ventura successfully sues for defamation. Really, he gets there's a settlement out of court.
Yep.
That takes some of the money away. We also get, and that's not addressed in the film at all. Also not addressed in the film is the thing that Chris Kyle did after he came back from the military. Because if you watch the movie, you would assume that he spent every waking moment helping traumatized vets. When in fact, he, with one of those hedge fund managers who set Jason Hall up with Kyle in the first place, he founded something called Craft International, which is Cop City, which is like a private version of... It's designed to train law enforcement in military tactics. Here's the little blurb that he apparently wrote for their website. This is from the Wayback Machine, because of course the website no longer exists. Thank you for choosing Craft International to meet your training needs. As military or law enforcement professionals, we understand your time is valuable. We are honored to be able to share with you the lessons learned from our instructors, whom have walked in similar paths as yourself, and some of whom continue to still do so today. Through these lessons, experiences, in-depth studies, pain/sweat/tears, and in some cases blood, they have set forth a curriculum rooted in solid fundamentals that have been time-tested and proven under a variety of operational conditions. Our goal with our courses is to do one thing: make you better by giving you the skills necessary to dominate your opponent and win. Yada, yada, yada. We are humbled to be a part of your continuing search and refinement of your chosen craft. Thank you for your continued service, dedication, and associated sacrifices made in protecting this great nation at home and abroad. Respectfully, Chris Kyle, President, Craft International.
Now, unfortunately, one of the funniest and most middle school things you can do is in your mission statement say, I like to be fun/nice/funny.
Yeah, it's insane. Don't put slashes in there. And also, just this is exactly part of the extraordinarily troubling militarization of law enforcement in the United States, the idea of which it's not like law enforcement was ever good. No. But it's just progressing and technologizing even further toward full on, like, inward looking imperialism. The idea of dominating your opponent and winning is like, that's not enforcing laws. That's not maintaining any kind of safety. That is...
No, taking an oppositional approach to the civilian population. Yeah.
We haven't even, and the movie doesn't get into this at all. We haven't talked about it at all. In his book, he lies about, in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, going on top of the Superdome.
He says he goes on top of the roof of the Superdome
in New Orleans, and says that he picks off like 30 looters, and we all know what some of the physical characteristics of people referred to by the term looters are.
Yeah, let me alley-oop you with a little line from the book where he says...
Yeah, give me a blurb, give me a line.
He's on a training exercise in San Diego, and somebody wanders into the exercise, and he hears him say the word popo, which he describes as a thug's term for the police. So this guy has a specific vision of the world.
He's racist. He's a racist guy. He lied and claims that he killed a bunch of black people, which, as people have pointed out, you can make up a lot of brown people that you kill in Iraq, where, thanks to U.S. sanctions and the first Gulf War, social services have been completely just decimated. Yep. So no one can really prove. It's a lot harder to keep track of who is alive and who is dead in Iraq than it is in the United States. And, basically you can't murder 30 people without someone seeing at least a couple of them, or at least finding a couple of their bodies. Yeah. And they're like, no, this just didn't happen. Like, you just made this up.
That's what the government says, I believe, is we would have found a bunch of sniped people if this were the case.
Yeah, and like this guy is a hero for this. It's sickening. Please keep it down with the sneezing.
Yeah, another one of his stories is that he stopped a attempted robbery, and shot both the guys. And what he claims is, when people asked him, well, how come there's no report about this? How come there's no record of you killing these two people? What he says is, well, I told the police to call the government and they must have just taken care of it. So we really only have two options. Either he is and continues to be a liar, or the government is covering up for his civilian murders, which I don't know which is the more interesting outcome. Thank you, Chris, for making me think about this.
So, you've given us a lot to think about. We salute you, Chris Kyle. So, in summation, I was talking to our buddy Aaron from Hit Factory, who we're pretty sure Ian didn't give COVID, about Clint Eastwood and the difficulty of finding any kind of authorial intent in this man's work, who so often... he acts on instinct. He picks a script that he likes and he shoots exactly that script.
He's doing the least, as the kids say.
And so it seems like there would be anything we extrapolate or anything we pluck out of these films about how Clint feels about anything is speculation at best. And with this film, it really feels like there's moments where it seems like the movie's going one way and then it goes the other. Clint has always called it an anti-war film. He has always stated his opposition to war. He is, you can read into a number of his Westerns bitterness about Vietnam. We talked on our Heartbreak Ridge episode about that film as maybe a failed satire or a poorly delineated satire. With this film, I really, the best thing I can compare it to is one of those paintings by an elephant, where you just simply can't know how much the elephant meant to do. And I guess that's true of any piece of art. You can always only guess about this. This is some death of the author shit. But really, I see in this film almost a Rorschach test. Not just for what I want politically to the film to be saying, but for what anyone involved in it meant for it actually to say. Taya Kyle says it's a loving tribute to her husband. She talks about how sometimes it was eerie because Bradley Cooper had so thoroughly captured her husband's mannerisms. The same thing people said about Morgan Freeman. And
he wanted to bone the man down. And that's okay. I don't blame her. Kyle Smith of the New York Post said, after 40 years of Hollywood counter-propaganda telling us war is necessarily corrupting and malign, American Sniper nobly presents the case for the other side.
But at the same time, you have people, especially now, people stick up for this movie as an anti-war film, like sort of in the neo-Clint revision, and I don't think that it's there. I think on a craft level, as you said, the film has a lot of thrilling sequences. I think Cooper's performance is often very strong. I think Sienna Miller is fine in it. I don't see any... This is it's almost an incredibly apolitical film, not in the way that many of the reviewers said, but in the sense of it having no coherent politics whatsoever.
Yeah, it's just to throw out two other quotes that I think back you up from other reviewers. In the AV Club, they said American Sniper is imperfect and at times a little corny, but also ambivalent and complicated in ways that are uniquely Eastwoodian. And then in Time Out New York, we get only Clint Eastwood could make a movie about an Iraq war veteran and infuse it with doubts, mission anxiety, and ruination. Now, this is a Rorschach.
I was just going to ask, do you find that makes the film compelling and beguiling to invoke another Clint Eastwood movie? Or do you find that because, often what's so interesting about the man are the contradictions. But do you find that to be true of this film, or do you find it simply to be a...
Yeah, I'm not sure I would go to either extreme. I like your characterization of it as a Rorschach test, not because I think it is, again, intentionally some type of cipher that challenges. We're right now in the era of a May-December, so I'm thinking about my Todds. I'm thinking about guys that present these extreme moral ambiguities in a way that really challenge the viewer to struggle with their own assumptions, their beliefs, their responses.
Something about a Todd.
And to me, this is a Rorschach test of how the viewer engages with art, how much they are, how much of the writerly process they're doing when they watch a movie. How much are they adding on? And of course, that's part of any consumption of fiction, right? Consumption of media in general is that you are bringing to the table a certain set of experiences, readings, values, associations, all these things. And that's, I think, one of the most wonderful parts of art. But if you are comfortable taking a piece of art and, to me, basically admitting that 70% of your reading is basically like a product of your own mind, then I don't know that it's a like source of shame. It just means that to me you're engaging with art in a totally different way than I do, which I think is an attempt to understand both the craft, the purpose behind something, and then maybe a different from the purpose product that they produce, right? That is maybe creating a range of experiences that I think are all legitimate and all part of the reading of the film as a piece of art. But this to me just makes me think that critics are crazy people on the whole, and that they maybe are not acknowledging how much is just whatever they want it to be, right? Which is okay. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it kind of makes me wonder about the way that type of criticism is represented, because like this film, I don't think that they would say that what they are doing is just bringing their own business to the experience. They would say that this is in the film, and that wasn't my experience. Now, to call it uniquely Eastwoodian, I think it is uniquely Eastwoodian in that, like you said, maybe actually we're secret geniuses, you in particular, because you often use the word interesting when describing these movies. I think that may be Clint Eastwood's primary reaction to this type of material.
Well, I have maybe a great quote to go out on, because, the film made over $500 million, almost all of that domestically. Very, very rare for a film to make so much money and have something like 350 million domestic and like 100 something internationally. But this is what Clint said in that Hollywood Reporter making of article. Quote, "War pictures are always fascinating for people. They were for me growing up, even though I'm not nuts about war. War is the ultimate conflict, and conflict is the basis of drama to begin with. And this story had drama on the home side too." Yeah. I mean, look, where's the lie?
No, this is all correct. But I think imagine the distance between what people are talking about when they talk about this movie and what Clint is talking about. And again, they don't have to be identical, but just bring some self-awareness to it. All right.
When you make an anti-war film, and look, in the film Jarhead, there are a number of, I think, very affecting scenes of Marines watching like official screenings of Apocalypse Now.
This happens
and cheering and hooting. Apocalypse Now, to me, one of the most effective anti-war films that there is. But anyone can read things. They're going to read things the way that they're going to read them. But if you make an anti-war movie and then I can send my friend Ian a bunch of really funny pictures of Army guys who got tattoos of Bradley Cooper as the American sniper, then maybe your anti-war film isn't quite as effective. I mean, you don't see Army guys getting tattoos of the weird gray-haired boy from Elim Klimov's Come and See. Now, do you?
You do not. But the other thing that I wanted to read and to go out on in terms of where Chris Kyle is at in his understanding of the conflict, I never worried too much about who exactly it was I was pointing a gun at, or who was pointing a gun at me or planting an IED. The fact that they wanted to kill me was all I needed to know. This is a absolute fool's understanding of conflict, to go into somebody else's house and shoot at their neighbors and their children, and then to say, you know what?
Yeah,
this is just self-defense stuff. I'm not here to decide whether it's right or wrong. This is just a fact of the situation.
Yeah, you're standing someone else's ground, you moron. You bozo.
Is there conflict? Is there drama at home? There is. Is there a fraction of what people are reading into this movie? I'm not sure. I think this is a story worth talking about. If you want to go read an insane book, go read Chris Kyle's American Sniper. Good to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest condemnation of the film is that the book American Sniper is a much, much more effective critique of his ideology, just presenting it in his own words.
I totally agree. And this is something I am going to hold lightly against both Spielberg and Eastwood, which is to take this thing that is such self-parody, such effective. To me, this is like a Kubrick film or something where you are diving into somebody's head and understanding why their perspective is so twisted or mistaken or whatever. And instead, just telling the story like it's part of the American fabric or something.
Right. And then the guy had the luck to get his fucking head blown off by some dude, and then everybody has to act like he was a hero, and that's
a damn shame.
Pretty nasty. Now, to close us out, we've mentioned that there are situations in which pickup trucks are totally reasonable, useful tools. We've talked about how, of course, finding ways for returning veterans with PTSD to make more meaning in their lives, that's not necessarily a bad thing to do at all. And I want to express also that finding a secure vantage point and using a high-powered long gun to enact change to the state of someone's aliveness is also, it's value neutral ultimately. And I think there's been a lost art to the sniper.
I'm becoming return guys for a very specific engagement with modern politics.
Look, we don't endorse anyone sniping anyone else, but we do encourage all our listeners to do research into some of the ways that people using rifles have changed history.
Many have come up on the show before.
Yeah, a number of them have. Before we get into any more trouble, we should probably close out the episode.
All right, well, I guess my only lingering question...
Rest in shit, Chris Kyle. It's a good thing you're dead. Just want to say that.
This is kind of like boring Twitter bait stuff, which I think is maybe why it's good that it's buried at hour 2.5 of this podcast. But can you make a fun actioner out of a war film, particularly a war film based on a real conflict? What do you think?
No.
Okay. All right. Great.
And then the camera pans over to John Krasinski. You remember that video of Michael Haneke talking about Holocaust films at some Oscar roundtable where John Krasinski
I think it's like
is
a Hollywood
also
Reporter
there?
thing or something. Yeah.
Judd Apatow too. So fucking funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, this one's movie disappointed me in that it was almost not rich enough to talk about.
I mean, it's an entertainment success in my opinion, but it doesn't change the facts of. And we've said before, we're not looking for propaganda films. We're not looking for political education instructionals necessarily.
I would like a coherent worldview in my films, I think.
Yes.
Or at least a compellingly conflicted one. And I don't think this one is
presentation of events as...
Conflict is the basis of drama. And war is the ultimate conflict.
We don't need to say anymore. I think that's it.
All right. Thanks for listening to our show. Remember to subscribe, rate us, write a review. It helps us on the algorithm. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell your dad, get a cross tattooed on your arm like a psychopath. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Pod Casty For Me. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, or you're interested in co-hosting a two-person Clint Eastwood podcast, you can email us at podcastingforme@gmail.com. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/podcastingforme. All of this is available at podcastingforme.com and shootingyourselfinthehead.com. Thank you to Jeremy Allison for our artwork. Next week, we have a different sort of heroism, one I'm very excited to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
We're, of course, visiting Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger.
A man who never
himself
admitted to punching cows in the head in his book. A man who never was beaten up by dolphins by his own description. A real American
Here's
hero.
Just a little teaser. I won't give you the end of it, but that Sully, not only is he a real human being, he's a real something else too. And you'll have to tune in to find out. For all of us here at Pod Casty For Me, including the deeply sick Ian Ryan and all his many virions, I'd like to say thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.
Thanks. Bye.